On my 60th birthday, my family made me sit at the kids' table where you belong now. My son whispered, "You're just slowing everyone down." I sipped my wine in silence. The next day, they woke up to what was missing from their trust funds. "Sit over there, Mom," Bridget said, waving toward the corner with her free hand, balancing a glass of Prosecco in the other. "It's quieter for you than the kids." I stared for a moment. The table she pointed to had 3 children already seated, one of whom was wearing a bib and stabbing at a plate of macaroni with a plastic fork. There was one extra seat, mine, apparently. I opened my mouth to speak, but closed it again. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I made my way to the plastic chair like a guest in someone else's life. As I sat, Maxwell leaned down, resting a hand on the back of my chair. He smiled like someone giving bad news to a stranger. "You're just slowing everyone down these days," he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. "My name is Lorraine. I turned 60 last month. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountains hold their secrets like folded paper cranes, silent, sturdy, and full of history. I married Clark when I was 24. We built a house on a wooded lot near the Blue Ridge Parkway, raised 3 children there, and started a textile company together that grew into a solid business. Our lives weren't luxurious, not in the early years. But we worked hard, turned cotton and linen into art, and eventually opened 3 shops, one in Asheville, one in Charleston, and one in Raleigh. When Clark died suddenly of a heart attack at 61, I was devastated, but I didn't let everything fall apart. I kept the company going and later established trust funds for our children, Maxwell, Bridget, and Saul. The idea was to give them security, a legacy. A part of me, a part of their father. Looking back now, I think that was the first mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake until they decided to forget who built everything they now stood on. They all live scattered across the country now, Maxwell in San Francisco, working in tech, Bridget in Atlanta, a luxury real estate agent, Saul in Boston, a venture capitalist married into a well-off family. They visit out of obligation. Call when they need something. And though I was never the kind to keep score, I did start noticing how rare it became for any of them to simply ask how I was doing. When they all insisted on flying me out to Bridget's home for my 60th, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was going to be special. A sign they hadn't completely forgotten how to care. But as soon as I arrived, it was clear I was an afterthought. Bridget's home was spotless, massive, and cold. Staff moved around like ghosts. The dining table was already set, long, gleaming, elegant. There was one glaring problem: no place card for me. Instead, they'd dragged in a kiddie table from the playroom. No joke. It had paper cups, plastic forks, and cartoon napkins with frogs and balloons on them. No one said a word as I stood there, looking between the tables. Until Bridget smiled and waved me over like a child being told to sit in the corner. I obeyed. Not because I'm weak, but because some insults cut deeper when received in silence. Maxwell's whisper still plays in my mind. "You're slowing everyone down." Not "we love you." Not "thanks for everything." Just that, like I was some broken wheel they were too polite to toss out. I sipped my Merlot from a plastic cup, trying not to cry while a toddler next to me dropped spaghetti in my lap. They laughed. Toasted. Talked over each other like I wasn't there. The night ended without cake. Bridget said the kids were too hyped up already and that maybe we'd do dessert the next morning. I stayed in her guest room, alone with my thoughts, watching the city lights reflect off the ceiling like stars mocking me. And in the quiet of that room, something inside me shifted. I thought of the years I spent at swim meets, spelling bees, late-night hospital runs for fevers and flus. I thought of birthday parties I planned for them with themes and goodie bags and homemade cakes. The time I sold my engagement ring to help Maxwell pay off student loans. The time I held Bridget's hand when her first engagement fell apart. The time I took out a second mortgage so Saul and his wife could buy their forever home. I thought of everything I gave, and how little it all seemed to matter to them now. So when I got home to Asheville, I called Edgar, my lawyer of 20 years. I need to make some changes to the family trust, I told him. He didn't ask why. Maybe he didn't need to. You know the kids will fight it, he said gently. They can try, I said. He helped me restructure the trust. Not everything. I didn't take away what they had already received, or the small stakes they legally owned in the business. But I redirected the remaining bulk, the real money, into a new beneficiary, a nonprofit community arts foundation Clark and I once dreamed of creating. It's something we used to talk about on the porch with wine in hand, imagining classes for young artists, free workshops for seniors, a gallery for local creators. Life got in the way. Now, I was bringing that dream back. I named it the Clark and Lorraine Foundation for Creative Living. And I didn't say a word to my children. It took just over 2 weeks before the first storm hit. Saul called first. He was unusually polite at first, though tight-voiced. Hey Mom, not sure if you saw anything weird with the trust fund account. It looks like the monthly transfer didn't go through. Oh, I said, as if surprised. Maybe call Edgar about that? Bridget texted next. Then called. Then emailed. Each message got colder. Maxwell didn't contact me directly. Instead, his wife forwarded me a spreadsheet showing anticipated fund flow versus actuals with a passive-aggressive note, "We need clarity on this. Our tax attorney is asking questions." I ignored it. Then came the phone calls. The anger. The disbelief. The blame. "You're being cruel," Bridget said. "This isn't what Dad would have wanted." "Don't pretend to know what your father wanted," I said, my voice lower than I intended. Maxwell finally called and asked, "What is this? Punishment?" I paused. "No," I said. "It's a correction. You raised us to expect that money," he snapped. "I raised you to be kind," I said. "Seems I failed at both." Maxwell hung up on me without another word. After that call, I didn't hear from him for almost 2 weeks. Bridget, however, kept pushing email after email, each more urgent than the last. She was angry, but also scrambling. I knew her type. I raised her. She didn't care about the why. Only that her sense of entitlement had been disturbed. She even showed up on my doorstep. It was early on a Thursday morning. I had just come back from the market, my canvas bag still filled with peaches and fresh sourdough. There she was, dressed in a designer coat even though it was 60 degrees, arms crossed, jaw tight like she was about to present a case to a jury. "You changed the trust," she said flatly. I placed the bag down on my porch swing. "I did." "Why?" I looked at her. For a long time. She looked older than the last time I'd really seen her. Not in a bad way, but in that way that adulthood settles on people. She had her father's eyes, something I hadn't noticed in years. But the way she used them now. Cold, narrowed, expectant. I realized, I said quietly, that I was financing people who no longer respect me. Who doesn't even see me. She scoffed. "Are you serious? Just because we sat you at the kids' table? That's your line in the sand?" I didn't respond right away. She took that as an opening. "You're being dramatic. Everyone noticed how you've been slowing down. You didn't talk to anyone at dinner, you just sat there. Sulking. What were we supposed to do?" "Talk to me," I said, the words simple, firm. "Not around me. Not about me. To me." She shifted, uncomfortable now. "I didn't need a parade, Bridget. Just a little dignity." Instead, I was humiliated on my own birthday. She blinked, as if trying to recalculate something. "You're twisting it." "No," I said. "I lived it." There was a silence between us, long and taut. "I hope you know you've embarrassed all of us," she said finally. Words getting around. "Saul is furious. Max is talking to a lawyer. This is going to affect how people see us. The family name. Then they'll finally see what I see, I said. That the family name only means something if the people behind it still care about each other. She stormed off without another word. I didn't watch her go. I just picked up my bag of peaches and went inside. The silence stretched for several days after that. I didn't mind. In fact, I found myself enjoying it. I sat on my porch and read old journals, dusted off photo albums I hadn't looked through in years. Clark's laugh echoed through some of those pictures, especially the ones from the early business days, him holding up swatches of fabric like a proud fisherman with his catch, me beside him with measuring tape around my neck and paint smudges on my apron. We were a team once. And even after his death, I had carried that team on my shoulders, alone. Now, for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone. It wasn't just the trust that changed. It was everything. I removed myself from our group business Slack, told our board I was stepping back from day-to-day operations, and handed over partial control to a local management firm I trusted. I'd spent too long managing other people's expectations. It was time to reclaim my own life. Still, not everything was easy. Bridget's husband sent a passive-aggressive email about future inheritance concerns. Saul's wife posted something vague on Instagram about toxic energy in older generations. I saw the comment thread. It wasn't subtle. Maxwell stayed mostly quiet, but I knew he was calculating his next move. I think the part that hurt the most was that none of them ever asked me directly why I did it, not really. Not in a way that suggested they were ready to listen. They asked why I was being unfair. Why was I punishing them? Why I was taking what was theirs. But not once, why were you hurting? Meanwhile, I poured everything into the foundation. The Clark and Lorraine Foundation leased a modest brick building downtown, not far from the original textile shop Clark and I opened when we were still young and hopeful. We renovated it with soft lighting, large tables, easels, yarn racks, looms, and a studio in the back for classes. I hired 2 local artists. One, Gemma, in her 20s, taught painting to elementary school kids after school. The other, Deshaun, a retired veteran in his 60s, hosted a weekly memories and thread quilting group for seniors. And I found purpose again. Not as a wallet. Not as a mother with an expiration date. But as Lorraine Whitaker. Artist. Creator. Person. We held a small opening ceremony. Nothing fancy. Local musicians, finger food, a slideshow of Clark's sketches from the early days. People came. Not my children. But others, neighbors, students, seniors. People who wanted to be there, not out of obligation, but appreciation. I stood in the corner and watched as 2 little girls painted side by side, their tongues sticking out in concentration. An older man stitched his wife's name into a quilt. A teenager asked if we had colored pencils because she didn't like using paint. And I smiled. I hadn't smiled like that in years. But peace doesn't last long when people feel entitled to your silence. About a month after the foundation launched, I got a certified letter in the mail from a legal office in San Francisco. I opened it over tea and a slice of lemon cake. It was from Maxwell's lawyer. In short, they were exploring options to dispute the legitimacy of the foundation's funding, arguing that the redistribution of trust assets may have been influenced by emotional distress and that concerns have been raised about the grantor's mental fitness at the time of reassignment. I laughed out loud. Imagine being so offended by your mother standing up for herself that your first move is to question her sanity. I handed the letter to Edgar at our next meeting. He read it, sighed, and said, "We'll take care of it." I trusted him. He knew me better than my children did at this point. Still, something inside me cracked a little. Not from fear, but from sadness. They hadn't just lost perspective. They'd lost me. Or maybe I was never really theirs to begin with. Maybe they were raised too well. Maybe privilege had choked out empathy. I'll never know. But I knew this, they weren't getting the money back. They weren't getting me back either. Not until they could sit across from me, look me in the eyes, and say, "We were wrong." And something told me that day would not come easily. The letter from Maxwell's attorney didn't rattle me the way I think he intended. If anything, it confirmed what I already suspected: the money meant more to them than I did. Edgar responded swiftly. His reply was clear, direct, and grounded in years of careful documentation. Every amendment to the trust had been handled properly, with witnesses, medical assessments confirming my full cognitive health, and dates logged precisely. We'd done everything by the book, anticipating exactly this kind of blowback. "They'll have no case," he assured me, tapping the last page with a pen. "Unless they're willing to drag this through a very public court, which I doubt." He was right. For all their arrogance, my children hated bad press. Their brands, careers, and online reputations mattered too much to risk looking like spoiled adults suing their mother for giving to charity. Still, there were consequences, just not legal ones. I became a pariah in my own family. Not that they used that word. No one ever said it out loud. But I felt it in the silence. In the absence of texts. No more calls, just checking in. No more updates about the kids' lives, their children's report cards, or casual mentions of who was flying where for which fundraiser. I stopped existing to them as anything other than an obstacle. Bridget blocked me on social media entirely. Saul unfollowed me. Maxwell, who never posted much to begin with, suddenly had photos of family dinners that I was notably excluded from. There was a part of me, maybe a very old, deeply embedded part, that ached. A mother never really stops hoping, I think. Even when her children are grown. Even when they're cruel. Some corner of your heart still waits for the version of them who needed you. Loved you. Saw you. But those versions were gone. Or they had been replaced by people I didn't recognize anymore. So I turned my energy fully to the foundation. We started offering weekend workshops, then week-long retreats for artists. Local schools began sending their students for field trips. The senior quilting circle turned into a weekly potluck, and Deshaun had started bringing in his old record player so they could sew to Aretha and Motown hits. And me? I started painting again. Not for sale. Not for display. Just to do it. There was a small room in the back of the center, nothing fancy, but it had a window that looked out onto a quiet alley lined with ivy and old brick. I moved a table there, a second-hand easel, some paints, and sketchbooks. I began spending mornings there before the building opened, just listening to the quiet and letting my hands move. It was the first time in over 30 years that I was creating something that wasn't for a client or a profit. It was just for me. Funny how long it takes to remember yourself when you've spent decades being everyone else's compass. About 2 months after the letter from Maxwell's lawyer, Saul came to visit. Unannounced. He showed up at the center on a Thursday afternoon, right as a kids' class was ending. I saw him standing near the door, watching the children file out with their projects: papier-mâché masks, finger-painted canvases, popsicle stick sculptures. He didn't look angry. Just tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. I motioned to a small bench outside under the awning. We sat, facing the street. It was quiet. He didn't speak right away, just looked around at the building, the sign above the door, the flyers in the window. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said after a while. "The foundation, I mean." "You never thought I'd do much after your father died," I said. I didn't say it with malice. Just as a fact. He nodded slowly, folding his hands. "It was a shock, you know. What you did." "You mean reclaiming what was mine?" "I mean changing everything without telling us. You changed how you treated me without saying a word, Saul. None of you told me you'd decided I didn't matter anymore." "That's not true," he said, but he sounded unsure, his voice low. "You sat there that night. You saw the table they put me at. And you didn't say anything." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't plan that. I wasn't part of it. But you didn't stop it either." He sighed, a long, tired exhale. I think we got used to the idea of you being there. Always. Quiet. Supportive. You were always the net, you know? The one who caught everyone. And when the net started fraying? We didn't notice, he admitted. We just assumed you'd keep doing what you've always done. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'm not here to ask for the money back, he added after a moment. That ship sailed. Good, I said. But I do want to understand. What made you do it, really? Not just the birthday thing. I looked at him. My son. My once bubbly boy who used to beg for bedtime stories and sit on Clark's shoulders during fireworks. I tried to find that child in the lines of his face now. You all stopped seeing me, I said simply. Stop respecting me. It was an obligation. A checkbook. A shadow. And when you forget that someone has a spine, you don't expect them to stand. He stared at the sidewalk, nodding slowly. I guess we forgot you had power. No, I said, gentler now. You remembered too late. He didn't argue. Just sat quietly, the sounds of downtown moving around us, passing cars, a dog barking in the distance, wind brushing the trees. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, I told him. But I do expect to be treated like a person. Not an account. He looked at me then. I'd like to try. If you'll let me. I studied his face, then gave a single nod. Trying is a start. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But he stayed a little while longer, helped stack chairs inside, and chatted with Deshawn about soul music. And when he left, he said thank you. That small gesture meant more than any apology could have. Later that week, I got a text from Renee, his wife. Just a simple line, thank you for giving him space to grow. It made me cry. Not because it fixed everything, but because it cracked open the door I thought had been slammed shut forever. A door I was still deciding whether I wanted to open again. About 3 weeks passed after Saul's visit. I didn't hear anything from Bridget or Maxwell, and honestly, I didn't expect to. Saul was always the one with a bit more introspection in him, even if it had been dulled over the years by the company he kept and the lifestyle he fell into. Maxwell was too proud, too distant. Bridget? She had always been in her own orbit. If she ever felt remorse, she wore it like a silk blouse, only when it suited the occasion. But then came a knock on my door late one Sunday morning. I was still in my robe, watering the succulents in the kitchen window. It was cloudy outside. The kind of day that clung to your skin and made everything feel slower. I opened the door expecting a neighbor or maybe one of the center volunteers dropping off materials. It was Maxwell. He was wearing an expensive-looking coat that didn't quite match the way he stood there, uneasy, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. I didn't move. Just stood there, one hand still holding the watering can. I was nearby, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Nearby? In Asheville? He gave a weak smile. Okay, not exactly. I took a red eye. I've been thinking. I stepped back from the doorway and motioned him inside. He hesitated, maybe expecting resistance, but followed. He looked around the house like it was unfamiliar, even though he grew up in it. The furniture had changed, of course, and the walls now bore some of my newer paintings, but the bones were still the same. The sunroom, the fireplace, the little dent in the banister from when Bridget tripped with a backpack full of textbooks in high school. Can I sit? He asked. I nodded. He settled into the armchair across from my usual spot. I've been angry, he started. And maybe not for the reasons you think. I wasn't mad about the money, not really. I mean, yes, it was a shock. But what hit me harder was realizing that you don't trust us anymore. I sat down across from him, folding my hands. Should I? He didn't answer right away. I think I started seeing you less as our mom and more as something constant. unshakable. And maybe in that, I forgot you're also someone who could be hurt. That's generous, I said, though not unkindly. But I don't think forgetting is the right word. You didn't forget. You ignored me. All of you did. He nodded slowly. Fair. We did. There was a long pause between us. I guess I didn't come here for forgiveness, he said finally. I came here to ask. What now? I studied with him. My eldest. The one who used to read encyclopedia entries for fun. Who used to fall asleep on Clark's lap during thunderstorms. He had grown into a stranger who now sat in front of me looking tired, maybe even hollowed out in ways success couldn't fill. I don't know, I admitted. I'm not planning that far ahead anymore. I'm working with people who value what I do. I've stopped looking for meaning in people who only show up when they need something. I don't want to be that person anymore, he said, quietly. I didn't say anything for a long while. We just sat in that heavy quiet, with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of branches against the window. And then I stood. I'm making tea, I said. You want some? He looked surprised. Then he nodded. Yeah. Sure. I went to the kitchen, pulled out the tea leaves he used to like, chamomile and mint, and started the kettle. He didn't follow me or try to talk. He just sat there, letting the quiet be what it was. That alone told me something had shifted. That afternoon, we talked. Not deeply, not about everything, but about enough. We talked about the foundation. About how he'd seen some press coverage, a couple of local news pieces. He'd watched a video online where one of the senior artists described rediscovering his joy after 30 years away from painting. I told him we were expanding, adding pottery classes, a poetry night, maybe even a community mural project come spring. He asked if he could visit sometime. I said he could come tomorrow if he wanted. He stayed for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just lentil stew and toasted bread. We didn't talk about Bridget or Saul. We didn't talk about lawyers or trust funds or who owed what to whom. We just talked. About music. About Clark. About how Asheville had changed. It wasn't a full mending. But it was something. And when he left, he didn't try to hug me like it was owed. He just said, "Thanks for the tea." I nodded. "Thanks for showing up." The next day at the center, I found a folded sheet of paper on my desk. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from one of the teens in the weekend art group, Jalen, I think. The note was short. It said, "Thank you for making a place where people like me feel worth something." I didn't know adults could care this much. I held on to that note longer than I should have, just staring at the words. Not because I needed the praise. But because somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, not for what I provided, but for who I was. A week later, Bridget called. I let it go to voicemail. Not out of pettiness. But because I wasn't ready. And I was learning, finally, that I didn't have to rush to meet everyone else's needs at the expense of my own. When I finally listened to the message, her voice was tight. Controlled. Like someone reading a script she hadn't rehearsed well enough. "Mom. I think we need to talk. I've been thinking too. I'm not saying I agree with everything, but I see that you felt hurt. I guess I didn't know how far we'd let things go. Call me if you're willing." There was a pause. Then she added, "Happy belated birthday. I hope the kids' table wasn't too uncomfortable." There was a trace of sarcasm. But also maybe shame. Or effort. I wasn't sure. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Instead, I opened my sketchbook and went back to the canvas I'd been working on. It was a piece inspired by the mountains. Layers of deep blues and faded golds, the light catching just so on imagined peaks. Not realistic, more emotional. The way the mountains felt in winter, quiet and unbothered. Like they had all the time in the world. A few more weeks passed after Bridget's voicemail. I didn't call her back. I wasn't ready, and I didn't owe her my urgency. That's something I had to unlearn, this belief that as a mother, my time, my forgiveness, my emotional labor were all things I had to give immediately and without question. But I am 60 now. Not just older, but wiser, and finally tired of being used as the family's emotional landfill. Instead of replying to Bridget, I focused on the center. We'd just received a local grant for community outreach programs. That allowed us to fund free transportation for low-income kids who couldn't get to the center on their own. I also hired 2 more instructors, one of whom had just been released from a correctional program and wanted to teach woodworking. He made benches and birdhouses with the kids. They loved him. On a Saturday morning in mid-May, we held a family day at the center. We had music, snacks, face painting, and every room was open for visitors to try different activities. I was just about to go help set up the snack table when someone tapped my shoulder. "Lorraine?" I turned. It was Bridget. Wearing an off-brand sweater and jeans, no designer bag, no entourage. Just her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I don't know if she was surprised I didn't look different, grayer, maybe, more haggard, less punished by their absence. Instead, I looked content. She saw that. I could tell. "This place is incredible," she said after a beat. "It is." She followed me as I walked toward the supply room. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, sounding rehearsed again. "About how we treated you. And what we expected from you." I opened the cabinet and pulled out a tray of markers and chalk. "Is that so? I want to make things right." I paused. Looked at her. "Why now?" Her face twisted just slightly, hurt or pride, I couldn't tell. "Because I miss you," she said. "And because I think I started confusing money with love. And with identity." "That's honest," I said, setting the tray down. "But here's the thing, Bridget. I don't want an apology because you're uncomfortable now. I want one because you understand what you did." She looked down. "I do. I'm not sure I believe you." She nodded slowly, accepting that. "Can I prove it?" I shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm not handing out absolution like candy." And with that, I walked back into the main room to help set up the art tables. She didn't follow. But she stayed. She helped a little boy glue tissue paper to a cardboard sun. I watched her from across the room. Her heels might have been traded in for sneakers, but the real change would take time and consistency. Around this time, something interesting started happening with the business. You remember the textile company, Whitaker and Loom. After I restructured the trust and stepped back from operations, I knew the kids would try to assert more control, especially Bridget and Maxwell. The board meetings became more transactional. The creativity and craftsmanship that Clark and I built the brand on got buried under spreadsheets and strategic partnerships. Then the quality started slipping. They outsourced parts of production overseas. Cut a few corners to improve the margins. At first, it looked great on paper. But longtime customers noticed. Reviews dipped. Social media buzz started souring. I got a call from one of our original suppliers, Etta, an old friend. "They're stripping the soul from it," she said. "I didn't want to bother you, but I thought you should know." I thanked her. Hung up. Sat with it. And then I did something I'd been quietly preparing for. While my kids were busy chasing numbers, I'd been working with Edgar on something else, reclaiming my stake. You see, when I shifted the trust, I didn't just fund the foundation. I also used some of those redirected assets to buy back shares in the company, through holding companies, discrete investments, and a proxy I trusted. Not illegal. Just clever. By the time the quarterly board meeting came around, I held a controlling interest again, just enough to sway the vote. I walked into that meeting like I used to, 15 years ago, back when Clark was still alive and we were the pulse of the business. Maxwell looked stunned. Bridget looked livid. Saul just looked tired. I'm not here to take back the reins, I said calmly. But I am here to steer us back to our original values. You've forgotten what this business is about. And that's on me too, for letting it happen. Maxwell started to argue. I raised my hand. I don't want your permission, I said. I want your attention. Then I laid out a plan: restore in-house production, rehire original artisans, shift to sustainable dyes, and reintroduce the seasonal, limited edition designs we were once known for. It was radical. It was nostalgic. And it was smart. Maxwell hated it. Bridget argued it was off-brand for modern markets. The board, however, they loved it. The numbers might have been dipping, but the brand recognition, the loyalty, that was still strong. And my plan lit a fire in them they hadn't felt in years. I left that meeting with applause and a reinstated creative director title, ceremonial, yes, but powerful. And then I did one final thing. I moved the company's charitable contributions under the umbrella of the Clark and Lorraine Foundation. From now on, 10% of all profits would go back into the community, free art programs, youth mentorships, and senior creative workshops. My children would work for a company that actively served the values they once discarded. They'd watch, every quarter, as the profits flowed not into their pockets, but into painting supplies and sketchbooks for kids whose names they'd never know. Poetic, really. It's been nearly a year now since my 60th birthday. Maxwell doesn't visit. But he follows the foundation on social media. I know because he liked a post once. Just one. A photo of a grandmother teaching her granddaughter to quilt, captioned "Where generations meet, magic happens." Bridget visits once a month. She doesn't talk about money anymore. She helps in small ways. Organizing things. Cleaning brushes. She brings coffee sometimes. Never ask for anything. Saul writes letters. Not emails, letters. I keep them in a drawer. He's slower to change, but he's trying. I don't know what will happen next. I'm not planning for a perfect reconciliation. But I know this: on the day they made me sit at the kids' table, they thought they were mocking my relevance. Instead, they reminded me of my strength. And the next morning, when they woke up to emptier trust funds and a mother who finally remembered her worth, I hope they felt it, not cruelty. Not punishment. But clarity. The kind that only comes when a woman who built an empire quietly takes it back. And builds something better without them.